Welcome back to the Inside into Industry Podcast, Season 4, Episode 5, your ultimate guide to the inner workings of the pharmaceutical industry. Get ready for exclusive interviews, insider tips, and expert analyses from the leading minds shaping the industry. We're here to answer any of your questions, so don't hesitate to comment below, reach out to our social media accounts. Get ready to dive into the fascinating world of the pharmaceuticals. So let's begin with this episode. And feel free to hit that subscribe button if you find our content useful.
Welcome back to Insight to Industry. My name is Ravi, and I'm alongside Talia and Liam. We are all second-year pharmacy students at UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. Today, we are joined by Dr. Shwan Baban, who is a Medical Science Liaison at Sanofi. Dr. Baban recently graduated from Wingate University School of Pharmacy in 2021, where he directly entered a fellowship after graduation at Novartis. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Baban.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ravi. Thanks everybody for having me today. Very excited to be here, and thank you for this opportunity.
No, yes, definitely. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your journey, from pharmacy school into the pharmaceutical industry and kind of that process?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving a little background about myself. So I went to pharmacy school at Wingate University. It's a small private school outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And during my time in pharmacy school, a lot of people come in, you think about the clinical aspect in pharmacy. This is the passion we come in for, helping the patient, right? But then as you go through school, you realize there's so many different aspects in pharmacy world that I can get into. And like a lot of other schools, focuses more about clinical pharmacy, community hospital, and so forth. And there's not a lot of exposure to the pharmaceutical industry. So what I did was, as I was going through the curriculum during my third year in pharmacy school, I was curious, well, what else is out there? We hear about industry, but what is it? What does that look like? What do people work on, and so forth? So I reached out to a couple of people from my school who actually did a fellowship. They were a couple of years ahead of me. And then I reached out to them and I said, what do you guys work on? Basically, they were both in medical affairs. So I learned about their fellowship process, understood what MedAffair is, and also reached out a lot of people on LinkedIn, through my network, just to get a better understanding. Each person has different experience. So from there, I just sat down and I looking at what I want to do next. I want to pursue what I want to do, whether it was academia, industry, or go back to the clinical practice. And I decided to look into a rotation in my fourth year in pharmacy school. So I did sign up for a rotation. Was more an agency, so it was a pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic rotation. And it was just very interesting. When I had that rotation, we're just learning about how these clients come in, what do they want to work on, was more regulatory aspect versus more medical, which is what I'm in right now. But it really solidified my interest in how we can impact more patients in the real world outside of the clinical practice. So moving forward from there, I ended up applying for the fellowship program to different programs. I ended up landing the fellowship with Novartis and specifically worked in med affairs, medical strategy, and medical science liaison. And then I've just finished my fellowship back in May. So I just transitioned to full-time job right now as an MSL in Rare Hematology with Sanofi.
No, that's really awesome. And thank you for sharing. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, but the fellowship. For one, that's really competitive. And, a lot of our viewers are, going into their fourth year rotations or, they may have considered now industry transitioning from, clinical pharmacy. And, that's a lot. Like you said, a lot of the schools are very clinically oriented and it's a mouthful, to be truly honest on, where do I start? How do I even, put my foot in the doorstep to even understand what industry is. So I guess my question is for you is, how did you land this fellowship? What tips and tricks do you remember being the most impactful when you applied and found to be most important?
Absolutely. Yeah, so thinking back, it feels like yesterday, honestly, when this was 2 years ago. But as I did that transition very toward the end of my P3 year to P4 year. So I didn't have an opportunity to do an internship or anything from that perspective. I did have that one rotation, but again, it was not related to what I'm working on, but it was still kind of a corporate world. But I think the biggest thing that I feel like helped me a lot through the process was being involved in school. So you have a lot of different organizations, nonprofits that I work with. I was heavily involved in different organizations and really helped me build my leadership skills, communication skills, in addition to what you learn in school with the scientific communication. So I feel like those helped a lot. And a couple of the different things if you think about it is being proactive as a student. So, honing on your specific rotations, what did you do? What did you get out of it? What was your impact? Did you go through rotations, or did you go and ask questions? Did you ask for different projects to be involved in? And I feel like all in all, that together between leadership, the scientific information that I learned from school, and that proactivity definitely helped a lot. Definitely the process was not easy, but as you're going through it, these skills definitely help navigating the process as you go through the fellowship, and in the end landing a specific fellowship program.
Did you feel like when you were on your fourth year rotations that you were able to leverage your clinical experiences and talk about them or utilize them, even in your fellowship or when applying to a fellowship? Did you find that to be really important?
Absolutely. And, in the industry, we do work with science and data and, dissemination of that information, but seeing what the patient actually needs, I think that's very, very informative and very important in that perspective. Because at the end of the day, we might be working behind the computer, or in my case, working with the physicians, but I always enjoy learning how do the patients do? What are they like on this specific drug? Are they responding? And as a pharmacist, when you go through these rotations, you have that one-on-one with the patient, and you can always leverage that to bring that humane aspect of being a pharmacist into corporate world. So definitely helped a lot when it came to those one-on-one and going above and beyond for your patient, because that's your drive, that's your star you go to, whether you're in clinical practice, and it really translates into the fellowship, into the industry as well.
Oh, definitely. And, as we kind of talked about, these fellowships are really, really, challenging and competitive to get. I think I saw a statistic where it was like 10 to 15% of, applicants actually land one. So, for those like, other 80% or 85%, what do they do? What are alternatives? How do they get, they've spent all their time, focusing on industry. How can they use their experiences and knowledge they've, gotten from school for, a job right after?
Correct. And specifically a job within the industry, correct? So just make
Yes.
sure. Yeah. So, what I tell some of the students that I work with, with the fellowship process, usually starts in October and it goes through December, depends on pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So even though that timeline is where most of the fellowship programs exist, but that's not all of all. So there are a lot of other different fellowship programs that are available after that December cutoff or January timeline, where still there are programs that are available that students can look into, and that could be available whether through LinkedIn, through the IPHO website, through word of mouth, that people realize these programs exist. So that's one other way, in addition to your regular scheduled time with the fellowship programs that initially in October through December and so forth. In addition to that, I've known people who actually can land a job afterward, whether they can maybe go into medical information, maybe they can be a contractor. I also know people who did residency. So, they go for residency, and you asked me that question about the clinical background and how can be translated. And I think that's very important too, for people to go for practice, get that experience, and then come back. I know actually an MSL who actually went through residency program for 1 year, then came back and did a 2-year fellowship. And then now he's a higher level MSL because his drive, his passion, everything he's done that led to that point. So you can definitely go to residency, and then after that, come back to a fellowship, or sometimes you can go residency, be a clinical practitioner for a few years, and then break into the industry. Depends on the therapeutic area you're working with and the specific functional area as well. There are also contract roles. So there's I believe the TMAG, the medical affairs, I believe, and then also seniors health. So those are a couple of other contracts that you can go into those as a contractor. But again, there are specific requirements. They may not be a fit for everybody, but those resources also exist out and about in addition to your specific fellowship as well.
No, definitely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I just had something I wanted to touch back on quickly. You mentioned a pharmacokinetic and a pharmacodynamic rotation that you had during your regular schooling period that was very influential to you. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned how that played into your fellowship at Novartis and gave you a great background to speak on. Could you touch on what you specifically learned from that rotation, and then how you were able to frame that while applying to your fellowship? Because a lot of our listeners are in that exact same position right now.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to the experiences you have, some people might say, well, I didn't have an internship. How can I leverage my APPE, or I didn't have an APPE at all? How can I, use the skills that I've learned? So specifically, I utilize the leadership roles, but also that translated into that specific rotation as well. So for instance, I could have just gone through the rotation and just do what I needed to do through my preceptor, but I also was proactive. So I asked, hey, what can I get involved in? Is there anything that I can help with in addition to my one-on-one project that I have already? So I gave a presentation overall that was already assigned to me, comparing different vaccines to the entire team. So that was right there, scientific communication presented to the entire broader team, and then taking questions. But another thing was reaching out to the commercial team in that agency, and they were trying to update their blog, for instance. So I was like, can I help with that? And it was toward the end of the rotation, but the aspect that I can hone on is being proactive and going that extra mile, asking for things you can get involved in, things you want to have an impact and stuff. Well, I think that's the biggest theme I would realize from fellowship process. It could be a residency, and even through a full-time job, is seeing somebody who take that extra mile. Do you want to just sit there and do what you're supposed to do, or what can you do to bring that impact and bring that new thing to the table? And I firmly believe that's the biggest important thing when it comes to these fellowship interviews and even full-time job is, what did you do? Did you just do the bare minimum, or did you go above and beyond? And by all means, I'm not perfect, but there's always opportunities to improve. And that's how you get to it, by being proactive.
No, thank you. That was very insightful. And I think it's a great sentiment for anyone in school right now to put everything into everything, because you can end up with a great position like you had.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of going off that, I was curious what made you decide to apply your skill sets and your experience specifically to medical science liaison versus other aspects of industry like regulatory affairs, or so I was just kind of curious if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Of course. So just like you mentioned, there's so many different functional areas. So where do you even start? Where do you want to go about it? So what I've done is reaching out to a lot of different people on LinkedIn, reaching out to my network from school, outside of school, and just trying to understand, what do you do? And, just getting that perspective from them. What's their day-to-day basis look like? What projects do they work on? And then, sitting back and thinking about it. Well, do I enjoy doing this? Do I see myself doing this project? And to answer your question, specific in medical affairs or field medicals, medical science liaison, because of the scientific background, was PharmD coming in and, enjoying those scientific communication. I actually wanted to go to academia to begin with. So I love teaching, and that's something very, very transferable into the specific role, because you're able to teach so many clinicians and so many practitioners and so forth, and you try to have a better understanding. What can we do to improve this specific disease, say this specific product? What does that look like? So those aspects, and then thinking about personality, being that proactive person who wants to reach out and connect with other people, having that relationship building aspect, which I think the most important thing in this job is what made me realize, okay, I have these different traits that I've utilized, and I can see myself a good fit in this specific role, which I've been really enjoying as I went through the fellowship, and solidified when I was looking for a full-time job as well.
And kind of piggybacking off that question, I know medical science liaison, you mentioned the scientific literature you kind of have to speak on. Did you find that you needed research background, or is that not something that's not necessary to hone in on a specific field within MSL?
Yeah, great question. When you're thinking back of postgraduate opportunities, they're always looking for a well-rounded students, for instance. So they're looking for a specific thing, whether it's leadership, for instance, research, what have you done in your rotation, and so forth. I don't believe research will be necessarily a big thing, but it's definitely a good thing to have for you to understand, well, how does the clinical trial work? What kind of trial did they utilize? What was the methods that they used? What was the outcome? What was everything they worked in that specific trial or specific research you work with? Because even as MSLs, depends on the company, you do have hand in nominating specific sites to be part of clinical trials. So that's one aspect that comes with the job too. But I do believe it's more about your literature evaluation, understanding, is this appropriate? What are the gaps in the trial? What is the strength and weakness and so forth? So that thing you learn throughout the school. But I believe having research can be a nice benefit to have. In my opinion, again, that's just my opinion. I don't think it's necessary for specifically that role. But if you look at the functional areas, that might be different. For instance, if you look at clinical development or clinical science, so those a little more heavy on the research side, more than being out as a scientific communicator. But that's my opinion.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. Because yeah, I feel like there are so many specialties within MSL that's like, how do you break into that, like oncology, like those different special fields. But that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I had also a question. So, at your job at Sanofi, it looks like you focus on like rare hematology. And, for one, that's really specific, rare types of hematology. So I was wondering if you could like expand on that, what your day-to-day is, what exactly you do as an MSL that focuses on one specific disease state, at a big pharmaceutical industry.
And the disease state, it differs from every company. I mean, as an MSL, there's a general understanding of what we do, but it can also differ from every company, whether it's a big company, small company. You might have different duties that you work with, or it could be split among the team as well. So from my experience, I mean, I just got hired currently with Sanofi, so it's only been a month. Basically, all I'm doing right now is training. So within rare hematology, we do have a couple different disease states we're working with. So as an MSL in any company, you would go and you have to go through that scientific training, learning the disease state, learning the data you have, and how are you able to scientifically communicate that information. So that's basically what I've been working on right now. I can tell you from my fellowship experience when I was in Novartis and working with the field medical team, I did manage as an MSL fellow, so I did have a specific territory. Overall, as an MSL, you are building a relationship with these physicians. You want to be that person that they go to when they have any questions, any scientific question. And basically, you have a set amount of physicians you work with in a specific territory. If it's a small territory or a big territory, depending on how many states you have. And you either travel to go see them, you can do virtual, it's whatever works for them, because these physicians are very busy in their clinical practice. So you want to work around their schedule as well. And usually you provide information about the specific product, the specific disease state, if there's new data, real world evidence, poster presentation, depending on what their interests are, and you provide that information. As I mentioned earlier, you can have a hand in clinical trials. So if a physician, he's a researcher or he's interested to become a researcher with the company, you can also facilitate that information as well. Again, that's specific to specific companies and how much involvement the MSLs have with that specific role.
No, definitely. That's really enriching. First of all, congratulations, for your first month. I'm hope it's going well for you, with all that training. And I guess another question I just want to piggyback on that is, you're in constant contact with different healthcare professionals, whether they're physicians or, I'm sure maybe like PAs or, higher end, medical professionals. And my question is, how does that, usually, occur? Is it usually in person, or is it more of a hybrid kind of profession? Are you working at home, for the most time of the week? How does that go? I know obviously you're in training, but
No, great question. And I'll piggyback on my experiences as a fellow, because it will be similar to what I would be doing as a full-time MSL as well. It really depends, honestly. If when I did manage the Midwest territory when I was a fellow. So I had 5 states that I was working with, and I was residing in Texas at a time. In that case, I would just reach out to my physicians and ask them what works best for you. It's all about what works best for them, because they have very, very busy schedules, seeing the patients back to back. So some of them want to see me virtually, go on a Zoom call, Teams call, and we talk. Some of them say, yeah, let's come to the office. I have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's talk. So I'll just go to that state or city and just go inside and talk to them. Sometimes I just showed up. We just showed up to the office. And because if it's a new physician that I want to meet and I haven't had a chance to meet them, I would just go to the clinic and try to talk with them. And another time also, you can see them at conferences. So there are many different conferences for specific disease states. It could be regional, it could be national, and you can go in there and you realize you have some physicians you want to see, you try to go talk to them as well in there. So there are different avenues, I would say, when it comes to building these relationships and meeting with these different physicians and PAs and nurses. We work with all of them, actually. So it really is depending on where they are, what the
Right.
time is and how can we best support them as well.
No, definitely. Thank you so much for that information.
Of course.
And kind of going off of that, what are some daily challenges that you feel like you've had to deal with? Not necessarily, I mean, even with training, I'm sure that's difficult, but I guess more so with your fellowship because you've had more time with that. What have challenges you've faced, with your career, even connecting with these medical professionals and every kind of challenge you've overcome with?
Of course. I would say initially the mental challenge, to be honest, because as a student, you initially transitioned from student to a pharmacist. And let's say you do a postdoc, you always have this imposter syndrome. You're always thinking, well, what do I know? How am I supposed to, do this thing in industry? And I think for me personally, that lasted the first at least 6 months. And there are still instances nowadays where I'm like, oh my God, do I know what I'm doing? So, I think that's the mental challenge to begin with when it comes to that transition. And even now, as a full-time MSL, I have to remind myself I'm not a fellow anymore. I'm a full-time MSL. So that's like another transition when it comes to the mental aspect of the job. And I would say when it comes to technicality and, learning to manage different projects, learning to work with different teams, for me, after COVID, where the fellowship, we were basically working from home. So I didn't get a chance to go to New Jersey to go where the company is. I mainly stay where I'm at. And instead of going out there, so kind of navigating, well, how the team works, how are you able to connect with them, doing a lot of one-on-ones. And you asked about, working with these professionals in the field. Access could be a hard thing, again, because they're very busy in the clinic. And you want to respect that. So a lot of different things you navigate, but you have a support system. You have a great team you work with. You reach out to either your co-fellows, you reach out to your colleagues. I became part of a specific MSL team, and they were always there to support, and that continues even now. Being a full-time employee, as I'm going through training, if I have a question, I have my mentor, I have my trainer that I talk to, the medical director. So even though there are different challenges in every specific area, it doesn't have to be just MSL. It could be any kind of other functional area, regulatory, commercial, but having that strong supportive environment in a specific company is very important because that will help your development, and having a great manager that works with you as well, in addition to your colleagues, can definitely help navigate through these specific challenges.
No, definitely. And do you feel like when you were applying for these fellowships, you looked for an environment that was more supportive and more teaching so that when you'd completed your fellowship, that you had felt more prepared to take on a more full-time role and that they'd help prepare you for one, to feel more independent, but then also prepare you and help you find a job after?
Absolutely. And when you go through these programs, you have so many different interviews. And I've heard this before, and I thought this was cliche, but it's so true. At the end of the day, what works best is the best fit. So they interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. And that specific characteristic they're looking for, you'll see that in the same team as well. And that's how it builds the growth in your personality professionally also, and building that brand when you're working with that specific team. And I was very lucky to be where I was in the fellowship and where I'm at right now, and be able to work with many colleagues. And honestly, they became friends. And even after the fellowship now, I still keep in touch with a couple of my old colleagues, check in, see how are they doing, and they check in on me as well. So they say pharmacy is a small world. It's 100% true. You see it in clinical practice, you see it in academia, and definitely in industry as well. So that's my biggest advice when it comes to those relationship building with your colleagues in school, outside of school, and through the fellowship and even thereafter as well. They're very, very important.
No, definitely. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah, I had a question about what your kind of day-to-day looks like for MSL. I imagine it's very different in terms of your task, and I know you're still relatively new, but I guess just, yeah, what kind of drew you towards what's your day-to-day look like?
Of course. So, you probably heard this before. Every day is going to be a little bit different. Some days you'll work in more administrative work. So you go in and, document the interactions you've had, looking at specific scientific literature. There's a new poster came out. Let's go read this. There's a training call. Let's go listen to that. Someday then you'll travel. For instance, I'll be out of town for about 2 to 3 days, going to a different state, different city. You might be traveling again within that state to different cities. So every day you're either on the road, you're on your computer, you're in meetings, and if there's a conference, you'd be going to that specific conference, and again, working with these specific providers and addressing their needs and so forth. So I would say it is different for most part, but it's kind of the same as well. It's more about your administrative work. Keep your continuous learning, because that will never stop. You're always learning something new, especially if you go from one therapeutic area to another one. You'll have to learn another disease state, another data, another information, and then you building that rapport with your physicians and providers and understanding where they at and what they need as well. So I would say that summarizes it for the most part, in addition to clinical trial support as well. And I would say as an MSL, depending on the company you work with, you might be involved internally. So you might be part of a competitive intelligence team. You might be part of training team. So that's the beauty, I believe, in this job, because you get to have best of both worlds. You get to work with your colleagues internally, and then also you get to go out and see what's happening in the real world and work with your physicians, nurses, and PAs as well.
That's great. I actually wanted to touch on something you just mentioned there towards the end of the diversity of roles you can find yourself within just as an MSL alone in pharmacy is something that maybe not a lot of younger pharmacy students really understand yet. And I just wanted to hear your perspective on what drew you more towards connecting with physicians and other healthcare providers to spread awareness rather than working internally at companies.
Absolutely. And, as a pharmacist, I came into the field because I wanted to help patients, wanted to have that. I enjoy my conversation with the patients. So as an MSL, I get to have both, being that internal colleague and then looking at the external end, being that person for the customers and the physicians and nurses and so forth, where you're able to provide education, but at the same time, you're asking, well, how is the patient doing? What do they look like? Anything that concerning for you that I can understand, and we bring that back and trying to work on a specific poster that can address that need, or a new data that we can provide some more clarification for you. So as a person, I love working with people to begin with and going out and about. So that definitely helps seeing that perspective, not just staying internally, but also getting both internally and then going out and providing that support to the physicians and other practitioners as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think that really provided a lot of insight onto how you can still use your care for patients, even in pharmacy industry.
Absolutely.
You kind of mentioned for MSL, you have to stay very on top of the information and on the cutting edge of trials. What are the main platforms, either before your company, that are just generally accessible that you use to stay up to date, whether it's a podcast or a website?
Yeah, I mean, most times it really depends, because, for instance, if there is something new coming out in the market, you get these emails internally, and that's new data was presented, that this information was provided, and you have your publication team. They always send you information, your colleagues, your managers, and really yourself. I was subscribed to, I believe, a couple of different websites, or specifically, you can be looking at the company's website, seeing their press releases. So whenever there's a press release comes out, you get an email, what's up to date information coming out with them as well. There are a couple other different websites. It's slipping through my mind right now, but let me find out what they are. I'll get back to you on that. But you can subscribe to those, and you get daily updates about all different companies, all new information coming out in the market with them, and definitely Fierce Pharma. That's one of them as well, where you get all that up-to-date information. But scientifically, you do get updates internally, and then you can do a quick PubMed search and just see, well, what's new in this disease state, or look at New England Journal of Medicine. So, a lot of the things you would use in school could be 100% utilized within the industry as well.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, we'll follow up on those websites as well. That's great information. I feel like it'd be super interesting for someone who's not yet in their career to look at what that might look like on a day-to-day.
Of course. So was that a question? I don't know if I missed that, or...
No, I'm sorry. I was just saying we would follow up. I apologize.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's great to have these different resources, because it helps you stay up to date. And, it could be just a conversation with a colleague, not necessarily just for your job. It's just something you can do with your other colleagues within your company, even other colleagues outside of your company as well, just to stay in touch, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
And
Um,
sorry, you go.
Carry on. No, I guess my question was just kind of based off of that. How often when you're, checking up on the new literature, do you, reference it even with your, medical professionals you usually talk to or coworkers? How often do you see something and you're like, oh, I just recently read this and, maybe we should adjust according to that, depending on, of course, per disease state or, whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, for most part, when you're going out and having these conversations with your physicians, nurses, and PAs, it's mainly specific to your disease area, for instance. So you try to stay on board with whatever is available, specifically within your company. One thing you learn, there's a lot of specific rules and regulations when it comes to pharma. There's specific things you can say and some things you cannot say. So that's very important to keep track and understand when it comes to compliance. It's more about conversations with your friends. For instance, with my friends, specifically in clinical practice, that they're in the hospital and if they are in clinical in ambulatory care, I ask them, "Do you see this patient population? What does that look like for you?" It's funny enough, one of my good friends actually called me the other day and had a question about some data that was available, and I was like, "All right, let's just go through real quick and talk about it." But this is the high level information. So it's nice that you're able to help your friends also as you're going through this. But not specifically when it comes to your day-to-day job. It's more about your personal life per se. And it's all available, any data that's available publicly, nothing that's internal that you're not supposed to say. So let's keep that clear.
No, that's awesome. That's glad that you're still able to, use your friends and colleagues, clinical experience and leverage that when you see specific literature or when you're trying to advocate for something. To certain medical professionals.
That's really cool. I guess I also had a question about just for some context, our school offers a PharmD MBA dual degree program where it's only 1 year extra to do an MBA or an MPH. And actually they're starting to open up a master's in regulatory sciences program. Also, that's going to be a 3-year program, and they're going to eventually try to introduce the idea of doing a dual degree with that as well down the line, potentially. So I was just kind of curious if you felt like these would be assets to a career in the industry, and like, is it specific to certain subspecialties, or is it maybe something to consider down the line? Sorry, that's a loaded question, so feel free to ask me to repeat it. Yeah.
No, fair question. And I've heard this a lot before, and I was curious about it as well. I think it really depends, to your point, what functional area it is and what's your goals and aspiration. So do you want to be in the C-suite? Do you want to go up all the way to that area? You want to be a CEO? Do you want to be a CFO? So it really depends on your trajectory down the line. And I can speak for specific for myself, in my opinion, when it comes to, say, an MBA, for instance, in med affairs or MSL, there are people who have it, but I've heard also they said, well, it doesn't really help as much unless you go, let's say, for commercial marketing. So that's where more MBA can be utilized further. I also had the experience when we were doing the fellowship. They would bring speakers who were like higher C-suite people, and they said, when it comes to getting an MBA, don't just get it because you want to get it. Wait till you are in a specific role where you see the need for you to have an MBA. And there's apparently different kinds of MBA, like for executives, something different than your regular MBA that you may have. And this person was saying that, after I got to this specific role, I saw a need for it. So I went back and I got 1 year MBA for executives or specific MBA that they needed. So I would say, look at what your trajectory is for your career and where you want to go, and then decide, do I want to get an MBA now or do I want to wait till later on? So I don't think it's never too late to get it, but it really, will you utilize it? That's the question I would pose.
Thank you. That's good context just kind of for how to approach it, because it is so many different ways to apply it and so many different career trajectories. So that makes complete sense.
Of course.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Does anyone have any questions before we close out?
Yeah, I had one more. I just wanted to kind of take you back right now. If you were coming into your fall of PY1 and knowing everything you know now, what are some of the first things that you would do, whether it would be organizational involvement or starting specific research, or what things would you start doing right away to set yourself up for the best possible career in the future?
So the question is, if I were a P1 right now, what would I do?
Yes.
Now learn differently. I would say explore as many options as you can earlier. Like as soon as you're a P1, understand there's so many things even outside of the industry. I mean, I've seen pharmacists who are consultants who do different kind of consulting for specific therapeutic areas, or depends on what you want to do. Starting your own business as a pharmacist, not specifically pharmacy, it could be a company or a side project and so forth. So really utilize your network, look at LinkedIn, connect with people, go to as many conferences as you can from the early on. I mean, I started going to conferences toward my second year, so I wasn't too late, but I would say if you have the chance, definitely get early involvement within organizations, within conferences, and really understand what's out there. I know curriculum can be a lot, and the main focus, we're here to graduate, to get the grade and move on. But definitely put some time to explore what your interests are, what's out there, because at some point when you get to P4, you do your rotation and it will fly by. You realize, okay, well, there are other things that I haven't explored, and you're going to start trying to figure it out in those last few months in your pharmacy school career, your trajectory in there. So definitely start early, get involved. Don't get too much involvement. Get a couple different positions every year you're in. Build your network, connect with as many people as you can, learn from them, and that will help you a lot understanding of what's happening, what's coming up, and where can you go in your career as well.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was great. I think it's a perfect piece of advice. Just hit the ground running. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I had one more question, and it'll be short, I promise. And it's kind of, it's kind of off of Liam's as well, but this is more catered to our like P3s and P4s now that are kind of approaching the end of their, pharmacy school career. And that is when they're in that application process, whether it's for a job, whether it's for a fellowship, and you're looking at a candidate and you're at the other side of the table and you're interviewing them, what would you look for that would differentiate them from other people? I know Liam kind of talked about it with him saying, when you come into school, what would you have done differently? What would you want us to do? But what do you look for in a candidate that, that makes you go, wow, like I would really love to have this guy on my team?
Of course. And take this with a grain of salt, because every person who interviews other people will have different opinion.
Right.
So this is my opinion, specifically what I usually look for, because that's what I kind of hold myself up to it. So I kind of want to find that another person that I want to work with. I think the biggest thing is really being genuine and being yourself. On paper, and it's funny enough, I've heard this today actually. On paper, a lot of students can look very competitive when they're applying to these programs, and whether it's fellowship and residency and after fellowship and so forth. So when you come in, who are you as a person? Really show them who you are, because at the end of the day, you want the team to know you for who you are, what can you bring to the table, versus just pretending, not necessarily pretending, but just kind of showing what you've done versus showing who you are as a person. And that's something I've learned when I was interviewing. I've always tried to be myself, vulnerable. And, when you get a question, let's say it's a silly question, for instance, like, how would your friends describe you? It's okay to say, if they say, oh, you're an emotional person, that's okay. I mean, that will actually go a longer way than pretending that's someone that you're really not. So definitely looking for someone who's genuine themselves. And at the end of the day, you want to get hired by somebody who wants to work with you, because when you're interviewing somebody, do I see myself working with you, or do I don't see a good fit for that specific organization? So for me, that's what I look for: somebody who's proactive, somebody who really wants to do the work, somebody who wants to help others. I love mentorship. I love helping other students, other colleagues. So do they have that in them? So these are a couple of different things. At the end of the day, your skills can be taught, but who you are as a person can never be taught. That's who you are, and you're the one who work on yourself. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to who I'm looking for usually.
I appreciate that a lot. That will definitely, even by myself, will be used a lot during my interviews. Thank you so much.
That's really comforting to hear. So thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you. Any more questions? Sorry, I keep Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your advice. We really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing so many aspects of just the industry. Hopefully this will definitely be helpful for our listeners who are still trying to figure out what they want to do, and like industries becoming a rising interest. So this is definitely helpful to our students. So yeah, thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And yeah, appreciate you spending the time with Insights into Industry.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed this as well. And you guys doing a great job with doing these, because I know when I was listening for podcasts when I was a student back in the time, there was one, I believe it was the MSL podcast, and that's what I was listening to. So it's nice to have variety of different podcasts you listen to get different perspectives. So I really appreciate you guys doing this and having me with you today as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you being our guest on this podcast.
It was lovely to have you. I hope at some point you'll come back and talk to us about your career when you're a little more established and have some more things to say. And I think it would be really cool to see your personal journey just even within a year from now and hear about how much you've learned and how much you've developed professionally. So thank you again so much for your time.
Happy to be back as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Over 80% of you guys are not subscribed, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications to keep up with our content. Also, hit up our Instagram, Spotify, TikTok, and website for other exclusive content. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope to see you at the next video.